So I think we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Working Well with Projects webinar. So this is a workflow webinar. Workflow, just to explain what I mean with that, is basically a specific setup that will help you do things. So there's different ways to set up the features and work, and the workflow is kind of like one way of doing something. And obviously with Marvin, there's many different workflows you can create. And I think it's really helpful to kind of showcase a couple of them. And this is what we'll do with those workflow webinars. There'll also be webinars that are just gonna be about a productivity topic, more general, not Marvin related. But this is a workflow webinar all about projects. So welcome. By the way, for this webinar, I will show you a version that's only coming out tomorrow. It has a couple of new features, a couple of improvements. So in case you haven't seen them, that's because it's a version that's not out yet. Curious if you're already here, if you are already working with projects in Marvin, if you maybe haven't started making them yet, or if you come from a GTD background where you're obviously very familiar with the idea of projects. So let us know in the comments. So first, I think we are going to just cover a little bit of the basics again, just in case someone hasn't started working with projects in Marvin. And then we're going to actually get into the workflows and sort of the three different parts of how to work on a project. So let me switch over to Marvin. First, just to make it really clear, what is the difference between a project and a task? A task in Marvin looks like something like this with a checkbox, and a project has a flag. So let me find a project here. Here we have projects. They have a flag. Why a flag? So I like to think of it as you have this sort of mountain of tasks, because projects are collections of tasks. And when you're on top of the mountain, you've tackled all the tasks, you get to put the flag in it. So it's kind of like a mountain of tasks you're conquering, and then you get to finish the project. So the difference between a task, a project, or how do you know when to make a project instead of a task? As a rule of thumb, if anything takes you longer than 5 minutes or an hour, anything that you can't really just do in one session, so that you sit down and you do it and then you check it off, it's probably a project. Now again, this is just a rule of thumb. It's helpful to have projects because there's a lot of strategies that you can only use when you actually have projects. And a project allows you to kind of switch between looking at something from a big level view, kind of zoomed out, where you see, okay, this is, like designing a website. But then when it actually is time to work, you can zoom in and really kind of work with the details and line out the steps and all that stuff. So it allows you to kind of, in a planning phase, you see the big level picture and use it as sort of as one object, one project, and not deal with, the hundreds of tasks that might be in it, but also allows you to zoom in. Otherwise, quickly, if you just list everything you have to do, like every step you have to take, which you should, because ultimately when they show up in your daily list, it's much easier to do specific steps, right? So here you don't want to have a, task that's called design website or, build a business. That's just, it would be overwhelming and you can't actually do it because it's not a single action. So that's why you really want to have tasks and projects and use projects. So let's get into the basics of creating a project. I already set some up. Obviously, projects live in your master list and not in your day, because in your day you want to have specific tasks that you can tackle. And to set up a project, you use this little plus button, and then you can say create project. You can also use the shortcut Shift P, which will always create a project inside of whatever is selected. So if I have health selected and I make Shift P, it creates a project in here. And as always, when you hover over it, you can edit it, you can give it a special color, but otherwise it inherits the color of the parent. You can delete it, just basic stuff. So this should allow you to already kind of just set up a bunch of projects. And also a really neat thing, let's say you use the inbox and kind of just do a brain dump, and you don't want to think yet if it's a project or task. You just kind of think all the things you have to do. Oh, I have to take out, the trash. Then I have to call Peter. I have to redesign the landing page. You just kind of do a brain dump, and then you later realize, you know what, this is actually going to take me a long time. So I'm going to turn this into a project. You can edit it and turn it into a project. And if you use subtasks, these will automatically then get turned into tasks. That's a really neat trick where you can, anytime when you realize something's getting too big, you're adding too many subtasks, it's not actually a checklist, it's actually individual steps, you can just turn it into a project. And you can do that also here. So you can turn this into a project. Obviously, it will go away from your day view, but you will find it then in the master list. So I think this is the basics. So let's get into the interesting stuff. As I've already said, there's sort of different parts that we can split our productivity system into. And very distinguishing, there's two kinds of activities we do. There's planning activities and working activities. So planning is anything where we kind of prepare for work and try to make it easier so that we can really just get things done later on. And working is clear, it's just working off the tasks. And when you work with projects, the first thing that we have to think about is that we want to kind of make it easy for us to actually finish those projects, right? So in the planning first, in the first phase of the planning phase, we want to make sure that we have sort of a narrow focus. What do I mean by that? So as a general rule, the more things we can be doing at any one time, the less we actually do. This is really, really important to kind of grasp fully. So if at any one time, like a good example is working on Marvin, right? Product. There is dozens and dozens and dozens of features that I could be working on right now, and I made each feature a project. So every time I'm actually trying to make progress on the product, and then I come here and I see all these things I could be working on, it's immediately going to trigger overwhelm. It's immediately going to give me analysis paralysis, right? And it's going to be really, really difficult for me to probably get started at all, because I'm someone who tends to get anxious quickly, and I struggle with anxiety. So, and then I go into procrastination mode, right? So the first thing we want to do is make sure that we have sort of a narrow focus, meaning we only have at any one time a specific number of projects that we can be working on. And we can do this in many different ways. And by the way, this is sort of a good way to illustrate of how different people need different workflows, because when you are, you have your own business, this is a very common scenario that you just have so many projects you could be working on, because it's all up to you to decide what to do first. There's no pre-made schedule. But if you're a student, for example, this might be different, because the projects that you currently have for school, they will be given to you. So, right now I have to do this paper and I have to prepare for this test. And also these things will have deadlines, whereas when you are self-employed, you don't really have deadlines. If you're working in an office, depending on your position, you might have projects which just deadlines or a mix of both. But we also all have a personal life, right? And if you're someone who has a lot of things you want to do in your personal life, hobbies and things you want to learn, or you have a house to manage, we all have this problem of that there's a lot of things we could be doing at any one time. We want to learn this, we want to do this, we want to make progress on that. And there is no deadline, so there's no given schedule, so it's all up to us. So that's why I'm going to focus on that. What do you do if you just have so many projects? So the first thing to kind of think about is, well, do we want to put them all into the master list, right? And again, generally, it is helpful to only have in the master list kind of things that are more immediate. Like, I can't possibly just write anything that I might ever want to do for Marvin in here. So where else do I put it, right? You can use a separate app, a document app, where you can just write really long lists. So I have a list of blog post ideas, right? And instead of setting them all up as individual projects, which would be kind of a waste and it would just make my master list horribly big, I just put it there. So it's good, to kind of keep idea lists, because if you're not actually going to work on it very soon, it's kind of like just an idea. Another idea is to use, and this is new, to store it in the note for a category. So here, when I go into this view, kind of zoomed in on this Marvin category, again, I clicked, you can't see my cursor, which is really unfortunate, but I clicked the folder icon to the left. And then this view opens. And now the categories also have notes. So here, I can just write my lists for things that aren't projects yet, it's just something I want to do. I kind of can map it out. We will have more strategies to do that in different ways later. I'm actually going to show you here because I already set something up. For example, here I just have things I want to learn: French, Spanish, how to edit videos, swing dance, but they're not really projects yet, But it's just something to kind of keep in mind when I feel like I'm ready to have another project. So then, but if we do have projects, so we might, add here a couple of things that we want to do. There's basically two ways to kind of narrow our focus, again, because we don't want to have 50 projects we could be working on at any one time in the master list. We need to narrow it down. Either we can hide whatever is not current, but right now you can't do that yet. There's a strategy coming up called back burner, where you can move things sort of in a back burner and get it out of your main master list view. And this is just to help you kind of narrow it down. But opposite, instead of hiding things that are not current, we can also just focus on highlighting things that are current. And there's two strategies that will help with that. The first one is the priority stars, and the second one is MIP, most important projects, the crowns. I have both of those turned on. So now I can go into my master list. Let's go to the product where I have a lot of different projects. And then I can sort of think about each one. Well, how important is this? How urgent is this? And I could come up with sort of my own system, but let's say anything that I feel like is very, very urgent and important, I maybe give it a red star. Anything that is just pretty important, like font options, it's maybe not that important, but it's definitely something we want to do, so it doesn't get a star. But the cubes, definitely very important, are big features. I gave it a yellow star, but it's not that urgent yet because there's other things that we have to do first. And then, of course, I can also just use the reordering, which is actually also a really, really good way to kind of sort things out, because you can always just look at two things. Okay, which one of those is more important? Okay, this one I want to definitely do first and move this one down. And then okay, which one of these is more important, and move that. So then you kind of just assign the stars, and it already kind of gives you a more organized projects list. And then, of course, at the end, you can just sort it by most important, and it will sort it so you have the most important one on the top, if you use the stars, for example. And the MIP strategy, the one with the crown, is really, really cool. That kind of takes all of this a step further. Because at any one time, there's probably a limit of how many projects we can realistically have on our plate. And maybe you have noticed this already, but if we have 3 things, it's kind of manageable. We can kind of always make a decision what to work on. But if we have 6 or 5, there's some kind of number where all of a sudden it just becomes too much. And this is very interesting, and it's something we have to kind of be aware of. How many projects can I focus on, sort of at any one time? And the MIPS you can use to literally give some projects a crown and saying, this is my most important project right now. This is what I want to focus on right now. You can limit how many, in the settings, how many crowns you can actually give. So I think the default is 3. 3 is always a nice number. So in Marvin, for example, I have these 3 categories. And let's say I just say, at any one time, one project in each of the categories is my most important project that I want to focus on. Then I give the crowns to those projects. Voila. So now what do we do? Now that we have sort of these this prioritization set up, one thing that we can do is work with the smart lists. So if you haven't gotten into smart lists, it's very, very versatile and will be used in a lot of other workflows. It's basically lists that you can kind of create dynamically based on specific parameters. So if you want to, not just have this kind of organization based on the hierarchy you have in your master list, you would use smart lists. So right now, the way you set it up, but we are going to kind of expand this a bit, is if you click Plan Day, here where you see your master list, you can set up smart lists. And we actually also added features to this. So now you can see finally projects in your smart lists. So let's say I just want to see projects that have any kind of star, or you can also do red star. And I call this Start Projects. This is my list that will show me all the projects that have a star. This doesn't save, so I only have 2, but So then we save this, and then anytime I sort of have this shortcut that shows me the stars. And I don't always have to do this because as I change my stars here, it will automatically be reflected in the smart list. So when I plan my day, this is really handy, sort of a shortcut. Another really neat shortcut for the MIPS, because the MIPS you should always sort of have top of mind, okay, what is it that I'm actually want to work on right now? We have this MIPS in your face. We added kind of a cousin to this. This will be released tomorrow, and I'm going to show you this later. But the MIPS in your face will just show you your MIPS, the ones with the crowns, at the top. So they're always top of mind. You can toggle them and hide them, but it's really nice to have them up here. So now let's get into actually working on a project. So you want to get this done. And then the last part that I'm going to cover after that is how to integrate working on projects into your day planning and strategies to help with that. Someone asked me, should you work on a project in the project view? So if you click on these radials, or if you click on any of the flags here, you will sort of zoom in on this project view. This is really, really cool and helpful when you actually want to work on the project. And so the question was, should you work there on this zoomed in view, or should you schedule tasks like you did before and just here and work on it here? And it does depend, but for now I would say most of the time it is easier, at least for sort of projects that you can sort of map out, and we're going to get into that right now, to actually work in the project view. So here, let's say we decided to work on this project, right? And the first thing that we want to do is map it out, meaning creating kind of a map and more detailed step-by-step plan on how actually we can work this project off. And again, most of the time this is literally the first step, and it's kind of nice to do this because as a first step, because it can feel easier to actually work on the project. It's sort of like in between. It's kind of the barrier between planning and working. It's sort of in between. Now I like to count it towards working on this project because it really is the first step, mapping it out, because you're going to make it so much easier for yourself later on if you have a map to follow than if you do one step at a time, then you have to think about what's next, right? It just creates friction because you're constantly switching between big bird view and focusing on execution. And so it's very inefficient. And if you're ever not clear on the next step, because you have to kind of conjure up this big picture to think about all the steps, it can lead you into just unproductivity because you feel stuck, right? So it's kind of really neat to map out a project ahead of time. I usually start with kind of writing down thoughts, and that's why I love the note. That's why it's kind of on the left. So if you have this split view, by the way, you can just see the note, or you can just show the tasks, or have both. So the first thing you kind of want to do is just get your thoughts about this project on, like, what is this? Why am I doing this? Do I have any ideas about already? You can just sort of like put that on the page, right? On this note here. That's really helpful. And as you do this, maybe you start to sort of have a better idea of the specific steps that are involved. And then you can kind of start making these tasks on the right. You can use these buttons here, or also use shortcuts, Shift T or Shift S or Shift P for adding a sub-project. So video library. This is a resource I'm hoping to create for Marvin, where you can sort of have different videos. So I have to sign up for a video library service, and I can just hit enter and it goes immediately to the next one. And then if I notice that, well, actually now I just have this long task list, I can sort of group it and add a sub-project and add tasks into the sub-project. Just add a task here. So I just kind of map it out, what needs to be done. This is going to make my life much easier later on. But what about projects that we cannot map out? There's actually, some projects that we can't map out because it doesn't make sense for them to be mapped out. And some projects that we can't map out because maybe we don't know actually all the steps. But you should definitely attempt to map it out when you first start working on a project. Why? Because if it works, great. You have a map, right? And it doesn't have to be complete, but you should at least have some steps in it. Often as you work on the project, you think of more things and kind of refine it. But it's definitely a good idea to try and map it out. But if you actually can't do that, that's a really good thing to know early on. Because usually that means you're not familiar with this project, maybe you've never actually done it. Like, let's say it's setting up a website and you have no idea how to set up a website. It will be very, very difficult to map it out, right? Because you don't know the steps that are involved. And what would happen if you just sort of have this in your to-do list? You would just endlessly procrastinate it, because feeling uncertain about something, feeling this uncomfortable feeling of not really knowing what to expect, or this fear that we might not even figure it out, that's perfect procrastination material, right? But if we realize this, you know what? I actually don't know how to do this. We can be aware of it and we can do something about it. And we can just say, okay, you know what? What is the next step so that I can know what to do? And it's usually either asking someone for help, and people usually do this way, way, way too late. But if you make it a habit of picking a project because you want to get it done, trying to map it out, and you're realizing, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. Okay, so what's the next step? I need to ask someone who knows how to do this to help me figure out what steps I have to take. Or you can obviously research things yourself, but then you should also make specific tasks, like Google this, or find a resource, or if you already have a resource that will help with that, make it a task to read that resource. But at least you should have some next steps to take to help you map out, because that should still be sort of the next step. Now, there's also projects that don't make sense to map out. Let's say I want to organize my computer and I just have like 100 screenshots on it and I want to organize. That's kind of like a project, but it doesn't make sense to map out the steps, because the steps are kind of, all the same. I just have to go through it and I know what to do once I do it. For those kinds of projects, it makes sense to maybe just create a recurring task, a time-boxed recurring task. So I'm just actually going to set up this project real quick, clean up computer. And then the only task I want to create in it is work on cleaning up computer for, anything that's palatable, like maybe 20 minutes at a time I can do, right? And then turn that into a recurring project if I want to do this maybe every day. That's actually a good strategy to tackle big projects like that. Okay, I'm just going to do 20 minutes every day. So then that's set up like this. So you don't have to map it out. You could also use a pinned task, which is another strategy where you can just create instances of basically copies of this. So like I schedule this for today because, okay, I should do this. But then it's still there. It's like I just created a copy of it and then I can schedule it again any other day. So yeah, this is how you kind of map out a project and work on it. And now we're going to get into the last part, and that is how to plan when to work on projects. Before we had sort of this project view, what you had to do was maybe schedule specific tasks of the project into your day. But this is, you usually not ideal because projects are not always very linear, and it also, we kind of lose the context of the project, and it's actually helpful to stay with a project for at least a while, to not, do one task of this project, then do one task of the other project, one task of the other project. And just too much context switching. It's not efficient. So instead, here's a couple of ideas of how you can work on projects. You could use time blocks where let me actually turn on the time blocks. When you plan out your day, what you think about is because here's something else to kind of think about that relates to this. There's project work, and then there's also just kind of tasks. And what I mean with is projects are usually kind of important things that really move us forward in goals or in our work. Because anything kind of big is usually several steps, and that's usually what's important. But we also, of course, have individual things. So like if I have a cleaning plan, and I have to water the plants today, especially if I have a lot of recurring tasks. There's like things that maybe come up, oh, I have to not forget to call this. And those are sort of more single tasks, right? And it's important to be aware of this, because if sometimes we get hung up on just doing all these small things and don't make progress. That's why I really like having the MIPS sort of on top, because it's constant reminder that you want to make a project on these things, and those are the things that are important. That's why they're on the top, kind of over the list. But project work usually also requires more focus. Often the tasks that might be kind of small, and you can kind of do them in between. But projects, usually you want to have a good chunk of time to work on them, to really focus, because you maybe have to, it's intellectually challenging, or you just have to be creative. You have to have a lot of ideas. Usually projects are kind of that nature, or at least the important projects. And so there's a book, you're probably familiar with it. It's called Deep Work, that kind of talks about this concept of scheduling time to work on these projects in a focused way. So this is the workflow that we use. That I will think about, when do I want to work on the projects, and I map it out. So here I want to work on marketing. I'm not saying which specific project, because it can vary, but maybe I just know that in the morning I'm kind of in the right mindset to do the marketing activities, which is a lot of writing in my case and stuff like that. It's good to do it more generally, because you can then just copy and paste the week from week to week, so you don't always have to set this up. And then I have this block here where I do my tasks. This is sort of the other stuff that comes up, household, whatever. Then I have another focused block for working on projects, for example. And then I can always see in my day view which block is currently active, right? So right now I should be working on resources. So then I can just go up and see my MIPS, and I know, okay, it's time to work on the resource project. And because I already picked one of each, I'm going to just go into the resources and work on that. So that's one way to do it. And then you don't have to schedule specific tasks, right? But let's say you do have just a lot of tasks in here, and you do kind of want to narrow it down and get some idea of, okay, what am I trying to do today? Especially if you use time estimates, it's helpful to just sort of understand what can I realistically get done. You can schedule tasks from here. They will show up in your day, but you don't actually have to do them there. And then you can also just add another filter where you say, only show me what I've scheduled for today. This is actually not working well yet because this is in a sub project, but we're actually going to fix this before we release this. That's why, don't worry, it's not out yet. But that's just one way of how you can kind of incorporate the scheduling and still making some kind of intention. And then it will also show up here. And of course, if you do have specific tasks scheduled, you can always click, shift click here to then filter it by this project. So then when I see, okay, right now I should be working on resources based on the time block, and when you find one task that is in this project, the video library, and then I kind of just hit shift click or use a filter here to just see that project here. So that's another way if you prefer this view. But of course, if you use your node, then this view might be more comfortable. So another way to incorporate project work into your day plan is if you maybe are more spontaneous and you don't actually use the MIPS, you just maybe use prioritization, you can use this new strategy, Project Focus Picker. Here, every day, it will ask you, what projects do you want to make progress on today? So if you don't want to plan ahead, pick projects for each day, you can just kind of be spontaneous and then say pick projects. I recommend sorting this by most important first. And then if you have maybe made a smart list, of things that are current or things that are due, if you have a lot of deadlines, you can then use the smart list and just see the smart list and then pick from that. So it will narrow it down which projects you can pick, but in any system that you create. But then you can narrow it down more and say, what do I want to do today? And you can pick as many as you want, and then they will show up for that day. You can edit it again. This is also sort of just to set another intention of which projects you're trying to make progress on that day in a more spontaneous way. Now, generally, when you let's say you narrowed it down and you have maybe 5 projects that you want to work on, sort of now, you still have to make the decision of, well, how many projects do you want to work on each day? Is it easier for you to have one project you focus on a day, or maybe 2 or 3? And this is something you have to experiment with, because some people like to just have one project a day so that during the day it's very, very clear what their priority is. But it also has maybe some drawbacks, because sometimes you can only make so much progress on a project a day, because you also want to have these periods of where you're not working on it, where you kind of just let it marinate and get new ideas. And that's actually a really important factor to consider, especially in sort of creative projects. You need time in between where you're not engaged in a project, and you get a lot of fresh ideas. And also, you might get bored with working on the same project, so you maybe want to have 2. It really depends. But this is another kind of question that's important to think about. And then the last thing is, let's say you really like working in your day view with sections or anything else, you can also just schedule time to work on a project. And we did make this a bit easier now in the new version. But basically, let's say I have this smart list again, where I sort of have my narrow focus of projects. And I say, okay, tomorrow I have these tasks, I have these events, and I already have, maybe use time estimates. I have 5 hours scheduled already, so maybe I can only work 1 hour on a project. I'm going to work on this project. You just drag the project, and I know you can't see this, unfortunately, because you can't see my mouse, but you just drag the project into it, and it will create a work 30 minutes on master list. You can edit this and change it to like 70 minutes or 60 minutes, whatever you want. And then when you click it, it immediately goes into this view, so you can work on it. So you don't have to plan ahead specific steps, but you can just click, and then you're here working on it, and it also starts a timer because you said 60 minutes. Then you just work 60 minutes, and when you can check off tasks here and they go to your day. And then when you did this, you can check this off as well. So this is if you really like having a day plan, kind of a sequence, so that you know when to do what. I actually do like planning out my day like that. I'm a lot more productive and efficient usually, especially then when I use the super focus mode. Just do one thing at a time, because I already put all this effort in, thinking about which tasks to do first, in what order. So then I might as well just go into super focus and work there. The problem right now is that these work tasks, they don't... they're not clickable here. So this is something that we also have to add. But just to sort of give you an idea. So I think this should have given you a lot of ideas. And again, I know it's a lot to take in, but if you just had, got one idea to take away from this, that's good enough. And you can always come back and watch this. And I will be doing more project-based workflow webinars, because we'll be adding more strategies. So there's more things to do, especially more things to that are about planning, especially if you have maybe deadlines you have to meet. You're trying to figure out, oh my God, how much do I have to work on each project, when, so that I meet the deadlines. It's especially important for students. Or things maybe where you're freelance and you're trying to sort of figure out your workload and how many more projects you can take on. All kinds of planning related features are coming up. So, question time.
Okay, so ERC wants to know.
Yes.
She has 14 hours of audiobook coming up that she has to listen to in the next 7 days.
Of audio?
She has an audiobook that she has to listen to in the next 7 days. And it's 14 hours, and so she wants to know how to set that up.
Okay.
How to get that going.
So, someone said they have a 14-hour project. It's an audiobook that they have to listen to, and how to best set this up. So I think this is a good example of a project that you can't really map out because there's not individual steps. It's just kind of like the same step over and over, which is just listening. So when you set this up, wherever, I'm just going to create it here, listen to audiobook. Can't type today. You have a due date. You definitely want to give it a due date. Like everything that does have a fixed deadline, it's always a good idea to give it a due date. Now, if this is something that you kind of want to be reminded of a lot, I definitely recommend doing something where it shows up in your day on top. So you have sort of a quick access to it to also kind of, remind you have to do this. So I'm just going to give this a MIP right now. Well, actually, I already have the max number of MIPs. So I'm just going to give it a star. And then you maybe have to, no, actually, this is not good. Okay, so you just give this a MIP, basically, and then it would show up on the top. You can, let me switch back to the MIP view, MIPs in your face. We will change the way this works so that you can have all kinds of projects come up automatically. But right now it's just basic. And then let me increase this setting here. I have 6 things. Okay. So now let me go back and give this a quick crown. And so now it will always just sort of show up here. And obviously if you have less, it will stand out more. And as to set it up, I think this is a perfect example of where you might want to make a recurring task. You kind of think about what's a good unit of time, so you time box it. So they listen to audiobook for maybe 30 minutes, whatever is comfortable. And then you can make this a recurring task. So you don't have to think about it. You just, it shows up on like you can, so before you actually decide on the pattern, I'll probably map it out and think, okay, it's 14 hours, so 30 minutes. So it will take me 28 sessions. Do I have 28 days until it's due? Oh no, it's only 17 days. So I have to actually, listen to it more, maybe an hour. And then it will work out, but then you have to do it daily, right? So then you would set it to daily and you set it up as a recurring task. And I do think, since this is kind of important, you should be able to give it a star so that it kind of stands out, because I think it's nice to also use the stars in your day to kind of prioritize what is really something you have to get done because it's urgent. And red to me is always, this has actually a deadline attached to it and it's important. So then, can you actually see, sometimes I don't even know all the things that are possible. But let me try to add a star here. Oh, I think you can't. Yeah, there's something we have to add.
I was just adding that earlier.
Oh, you were? Okay, Mark was already adding that. So as you can see, there's always little things that we notice, oh, this needs this needs this, and always definitely tell us when you do notice something like that. Usually it's not by design, it's just something we overlooked. So yeah, I hope that this answers the question and gives you an idea of how I would probably tackle this. Sure, there's other ways, but this is sort of, I think, the most obvious, and yeah, how I tackle these things that are kind of all just one and the same. So do we have any other questions?
So Rob recommends Deep Work by Cal Newport as a useful book for everyone. Have you read that?
Deep Work?
Deep Work by...
Yeah, I did. Yeah, that's exactly the book I mentioned, Deep Work by Cal Newport. And yeah, definitely very, very good recommendation. It's a really good book, and actually a lot of people said it sort of changed the way they think about work. And the projects do fit into that, because most of the time when you want to do deep work, it is related to some kind of bigger project. maybe a book you're writing, something like that. Oh, actually, something that someone asked me before is, when do you know whether or not you should set up a category or a project? Because obviously there's some projects that are so large, they might already make more sense to be actually a category. Because Marvin in some ways is also a project, but it's just so long term. Like, it's not something that I'm going to check off anytime soon. You can make categories for that, and it's just more long term, right? Same thing with maybe if you're a freelancer, if you have different clients, you're obviously not maybe going to have a client forever, but even if you have a client for 6 months, I would probably set that up as a category or a subcategory in your work folder, or however you want to set it up, because it's a long enough project working with that client that it kind of entails a lot of different other projects, and that's always a good clue. If something would have too many nestings of other projects, you might want to consider making it a category, so it's sort of more permanent. I just see a question from Mehdi, if the strategy is not deployed yet. Well, we do have one of the strategies that just shows you all the crowned ones. This one is already out. So if you want to use the MIP strategy, most important projects, and kind of assign the crown to the projects that are most important right now, then you can see those always automatically at the top. And by the way, speaking of the most important projects, so some people do this thing where they make this rule for themselves that, let's say you only want to work on 3 projects at any one time. So you assign 3 crowns, you see the 3 projects at the top, and then as you work them off, you're not allowed to reassign the crown to something else until you have done all of your 3 projects, right? Otherwise, there might be one project that you just don't really like doing, and it kind of stays there, and you just keep assigning the crown to other things, which kind of defeats the purpose, because if it was crowned, right? It was, determined to be one of the most important projects, you should get it done. So it's kind of an interesting rule, because usually what happens is that there's something else you're really excited about and you want to actually get started on that, but because of your own rule, you're kind of not allowed to. And so then you kind of more forced to finish the project that you're not excited about. So you can start 3 new crowned projects. So yeah, but this other strategy where you can sort of pick it every day. So every day you get this thing. This will come out soon, probably tomorrow or the day after. And then we're going to have more ways of having dynamically generated projects on top. Okay. Let's see. Are there any other questions? I can't actually see the questions. Yeah, we did work a lot on project-focused strategies, because it is really great, and it is something that I think is really, really important in any workflow, and just so many advantages. And we do definitely need a lot of strategies to work well with projects. So this is kind of a focus right now, for sure. So definitely let us know anytime there's something with projects you want to do and you can't, or an idea you have, or even just a problem you have with working in projects in your real life, and then we'll figure out a solution. We do have still a really long to-do list for things we're going to add to kind of these features that we showed you today. But yeah, ideas and feedback from you is always really, really helpful. And especially if there's something that you really, really need urgently, do let us know that too. That it's actually something urgent, and then we can usually prioritize it. Oh, okay, somebody had a good question. There's a way to schedule time to work on a project, so like say 30 minutes, but every day, so it's basically recurring. You can only do this, you can sort of do it. So let's say I want to work on this task. It's not an official work it task, but you can just, make it a task here. Say work on video library for 30 minutes, right? And now I want to make this automatically show up. So again, I make it recurring. Say this I'm going to do daily. Or you know what? You really shouldn't work weekends. So let's just select the weekdays. And now it's a recurring task. And it does show up like this, and you can't directly click on it like the other one. But if you use this strategy, which by the way, I think most people should have this enabled. We just made this a separate strategy because now you can have settings, right? And you can kind of say how you want it to show. If this is on, so it gives you always context of where this task is actually in, so that you know, okay, this is in the video library project. You can also click then on this to open it. So it's kind of the same thing. It's a shortcut if you prefer to work on in this view. So that's how you would set up that. And it's just a recurring task in here, but it won't bother you. It's just sort of here at the bottom. And actually, we could even add a filter here where you can just hide recurring, and then you wouldn't even see it. And then, as you work that off, you get also the same benefit where you have sort of this double check off. And who doesn't like to check off tasks? You work on it, you check off stuff here, and then, okay, I worked on it for 30 minutes, and then you can check it off here. And with the timer, same thing, you can just start the timer and then click, so you still get the timer. I think we're going to make the timer here clickable too. But yeah, that's how you would do that. Kind of a workaround, but I think it works. So Tom Rice says, my struggle is picking something to start. I put things in my planner for the week, but they're not urgent, so they don't come back out. Yes, probably then you should make that planning task of picking projects part of your workflow. So you could maybe set up, a recurring task for every week. Well, actually, this is a really important strategy I completely left out right now. To sort of, actually, this kind of maybe is a good idea to show right now. Planning ahead, great for projects. Actually, mostly recommend just using it for projects. But so yeah, you could try to pick projects for the week every Monday, right? And then you toggle your master list here, and you can also use your smart list if you already have all the starred ones. So, you want to do those first. You can think about, that's actually how I work for Marvin. I just think about, okay, June, what do I want to get done in June? I want to get done this project, and I just drag it in here. And this is what we call plan. So now my plan is to do these things in June. And then I can switch over to the week view. So let's say I have, a bunch of things. I want to do this feature and this feature all in June, and this feature. I go to the week. Then I click here this month in this tab, and now I see all the things I want to do this month. So then I can kind of allocate it. Okay, this week from this month, I'm just going to do a fourth approximately. So I'm going to just do 2. Voila. And then when I want to plan my day here, I can also think about, okay, what's in this week? Or when I pick projects for the top, I just want to say here, planned this week, and then pick from here. That's kind of a way to like narrow it down and kind of put it through a funnel, like first figure out what you want to do this month and then this week. Yeah, and then another really, Tom had a really good point. I do want to show this. Sometimes, so we do have alternatives already. If you don't like planning out your day in detail, you're kind of more of a spontaneous person. And one way right now where you can work maybe on just your week. So like, let's say you just plan out which projects you want to do, but you don't want to bother with, figuring out what to do each day. You just kind of want to pick from that week. You can use the wall. It's a strategy. And then here on the top right, you can go to the wall. And you can say, just show me everything that's planned this week. And it will show projects as well. And single tasks if you have them. And then this is also a nice way to just, be here and work from here. If you already maybe finished all your tasks that sort of come up here, or you don't have them at all, then you just say, okay, I'm going to want to make progress now on important stuff. And then you just go here, and then you just see this. And then you can click the same way, and it will take you into the Zoom level. That's a very cool thing that you can incorporate. So I can't really keep up with all the comments. So sorry. Any projects? Any questions? Projects? Anything else?
See. Did you see how DRC says she really needs to stick with finishing the project right up to the put the bow on the package? Like she'll often do a lot of it without quite doing the last steps. Did you already address that?
No. So how do you make sure you kind of finish the projects? Because this is actually kind of an important point. What sort of when you work on a project, right? There's sort of a start phase and then kind of a middle phase and an end phase. And usually there's sort of a curve that you can map out of how motivated you are at each stage. And you know, the beginning for a lot of people is very exciting, kind of the idea phase. And as you work on it, you know, there's phases where it goes easier. You might get tired of it at some point, but finishing is actually interestingly often where a lot of people hit sort of a snag. And it can psychologically, it probably has a lot of different reasons. You know, we sort of feel like, oh, now it's actually, we have to sort of say it's finished. What does that mean? Like, is it good enough? Is it perfect enough? Or it will go out in the world, and that can cause anxiety. So we kind of just delay basically the finishing. But sometimes it's also just because we got tired of it, or, you know, the end steps are usually where we have to polish it, and that maybe triggers perfectionism too much, which is uncomfortable. Because before we're just sort of trying to make progress and it feels really good, but then at the end you have to actually engage with it again and kind of, you know, like editing an article, sort of the last step. You've already seen this text so many times. So I think it helps to already be aware of that. So it is already great that you know yourself and you know that this is something you struggle with. And then just be extra kind and be maybe, you know, kind of make it set up some kind of reward for yourself so that the end, at least that there's something really nice right after the sort of difficult part. Or you could ask somebody to help with that. Just tell them, hey, you know what, I really want to finish this project by XYZ, and kind of do set some sort of deadline with that person. You can also maybe do some kind of accountability thing where you just say, you know what, I just got to have more pressure on myself, or I'm never going to finish this right now. So I'm just going to say, if I finish it by then, I get this, and if I don't finish it by then, maybe I have to do this. And I actually do this kinds of stuff a lot with Mark. It's my accountability buddy. And also this strategy sort of I mentioned before of, if you, let's say, have a rule, of course, every time you set up a rule for yourself, you can break it, right? But at least then you feel kind of bad about it. So maybe that's a deterrent. But you can have this rule of where you say, you know what, I picked this as a crown, and I'm not allowed to pick another project to work on until I finish this, until I finish all the crowns. So that can be another thing to kind of help, where you just don't allow yourself to start something new that you, in the beginning, were usually excited about something. And yeah, those are sort of the strategies. It's more mental strategies right now. It's not implemented, but we will integrate more and more of these things right into Marvin to make it more attractive. For example, Marvin might also notice he will track when you have worked on a project, something because you haven't done anything for 5 days now before you did something every day. And then he can, you know, gently kind of start a conversation maybe about it, or help you figure out what's really the snag, what is really the dread, and then you can come up with a solution to overcome that. But yeah, for now you have to do this, be aware of it yourself when something just kind of lingers. But I think these maybe in your face strategies and project in your day view kind of help with that, because you will see, oh, this has been there for so long. We'll also actually add a stale marker. So if you use this strategy that shows you how old something is, something has been, you know, created more than 60 days ago. So maybe at some point it will be stale to be more obvious. And we'll have other things similar to that. So where it would show you when you have been inactive for a certain number of days, it will pop up, you know, kind of like inactive project. You haven't done anything for 5 days, and you can obviously set your limits there. So yeah, I hope that answered the question. Yeah, the idea of setting a max number of MIPS, yeah, because if, you know, too many things are important, then nothing is important. So it's just this reminder of, you cannot just focus on all these things at once, because again, this sort of rule to think about with projects, the more things that you can do at any one time, the less stuff you actually get done. And it kind of applies to everything. Like if you have a really long list, you're actually less likely to finish it. And when you compare it to, scheduling maybe just 5 tasks and 30 tasks, it's often people who have 30 tasks and they maybe get done 3, but if you just have 5, then you're very likely to actually finish all 5, and then you can still add more. So it's just this principle of whenever you feel overwhelmed, you're just more likely to procrastinate and not get started at all. So, analysis paralysis or just overwhelm, all those things will trigger procrastination. So definitely try to limit it step by step and have some kind of focus. It will make your life so much easier. And another kind of cool thing that's coming up is themes. So you could, for example, say, kind of set up these rules so that you don't always have to think about which projects to do. So for example, in my case with the Marvin, I could set up a rule that's saying Mondays marketing days, Wednesdays and Thursdays is product days, and then Tuesdays is resources day. And then I'll be able to create sort of these themes that come up again, and they will show here on the top. And then I can also have the strategy, we're going to expand it so that it will automatically only show you the top projects for each of that, for that theme. So automatically it will only show me marketing projects on marketing days, and stuff like that. So dynamically generated kind of project shortcuts here. Because lots of stuff coming up, lots of ideas. Oh yeah, emojis. You can use emojis everywhere, and it does make it a lot more fun. I actually put emojis for all of my recurring tasks, so they kind of stick out here in the day view. And you can also, of course, add emojis to project titles. It does make it more fun and more, I don't know, I really like emojis. So yeah, people have productivity partners. Definitely a very, very helpful strategy. Overall, accountability, working with people, having people hold you accountable. There's also a lot of things we want to do there. Helping you find somebody who has similar goals or similar things they're doing, and then you can kind of, keep tabs on each other and encourage each other. Or you can actually assign somebody an accountability partner, and then maybe they get sent a list of all the things you got done. I know I would want to really get a lot done so I can impress that person and not embarrass myself. Yeah, lots of stuff coming up. Mark, any more questions?
Well, we got some good feedback, feature requests.
Feature requests?
Talk about habits a bit some more.
Habits, yes.
But yeah, I think that's it for questions.
Cool.
For tonight.
Okay, so I think we're gonna end this, and thank you so much for joining us. And as always, you can always email me at contact@amazingmarvin.com if you have feature requests or questions, or you want help with your workflow. Always really happy to hear from you. And here we are. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And I think we're gonna end this.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.